Before we begin today's story, if you're fascinated by the untold stories of World War II, the innovations, the deceptions, the industrial miracles that actually won the war, you need to subscribe to War Rewind right now. We're covering the history that textbooks skip. The Ghost Army story you're about to hear was classified for 50 years. Most people still don't know it happened. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible true stories. Now, let's talk about the army that never existed. June 1944. Somewhere near Dover, England. A German reconnaissance aircraft flew high over the English coast, cameras clicking, capturing every detail of Allied positions below. The pilot maintained altitude, avoiding British fighters, focused solely on gathering intelligence. The photographs would be analyzed by Wehrmacht intelligence officers within hours. The images revealed exactly what German High Command expected to see: massive military buildup, an entire American army group positioned in southeast England, clearly preparing for invasion across the narrowest point of the English Channel. Destination: Calais, France. The photographs showed hundreds of Sherman tanks, artillery batteries, supply depots sprawling across fields, tank landing ships and transport vessels crowding harbors, command posts with communication antennas, troop encampments, everything indicating imminent amphibious assault. Wehrmacht intelligence analyzed the photos carefully, cross-referenced with other intelligence sources. Radio intercepts confirmed American units in the area. Proper military communications, coded but identifiable. Signal intelligence tracked American command structures. Aerial reconnaissance showed consistent activity over multiple flights spanning weeks. The conclusion was undeniable. General George S. Patton, America's most aggressive, most successful combat commander, was preparing to lead the 1st United States Army Group across the Channel to Calais. Over 30,000 soldiers, hundreds of tanks, the main invasion force. Adolf Hitler studied the intelligence reports personally. He was convinced. Calais made strategic sense. The shortest crossing, direct route to Germany's industrial heartland. Patton wouldn't be sitting in England doing nothing. Patton meant attack, meant invasion, meant Calais. Hitler issued orders. 2 elite panzer divisions, the 15th and 116th Panzer, would remain at Calais. Wait for Patton. Destroy the American invasion when it came. These weren't ordinary divisions. These were some of Germany's best armored units. Experienced, well-equipped, battle-hardened. Hitler was keeping his best forces away from other fronts, specifically to counter Patton's anticipated invasion at Calais. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The invasion came. Not at Calais. At Normandy. Over 150 miles west of where Hitler's panzers waited. The 2 elite panzer divisions that could have reinforced Normandy, that could have driven Allied forces back into the sea, sat at Calais for critical days, waiting for an invasion that never came, waiting for Patton's army to cross the Channel. Patton's army never invaded at Calais because Patton's army near Dover never existed. Every tank the German reconnaissance photographed was inflatable rubber. Every artillery piece was an inflatable prop. The supply depots, the vehicles, the equipment visible from the air, inflatable. Rubber and canvas stretched over frames, inflated with portable air compressors. The radio communications Wehrmacht signals intelligence intercepted were fake. Broadcast by a handful of soldiers following scripted protocols, creating the illusion of an entire army group's command structure. The activity patterns aerial reconnaissance documented were theater. Staged performances for German cameras. The entire 1st United States Army Group was a deception. created by 1,100 American soldiers, many of them recruited from art schools, armed not primarily with rifles, but with inflatable tanks, speakers playing recordings, and fake radio equipment. They called themselves the Ghost Army. Officially, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Their mission was to deceive German intelligence, make the Germans believe American forces were places they weren't, convince Hitler to position troops badly, draw German strength away from actual operations. At Calais, they convinced Hitler to keep 2 Panzer divisions waiting for an invasion that never came. Those divisions weren't at Normandy on D-Day. Military historians estimate the Ghost Army's Calais deception saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives by keeping German armor away from Normandy beaches during the critical first days. 1,100 artists with inflatable tanks created a phantom army of 30,000 soldiers, fooled German intelligence completely, saved tens of thousands of lives, then stayed silent about it for 50 years because their operations remained classified until 1996. This is their story: how artists became soldiers, how creativity became warfare, how the Ghost Army operated 20 major deceptions across Europe, fooled the Germans repeatedly, and remained unknown even to the soldiers whose lives they saved. The story begins in early 1944, when Allied planners recognized a critical problem. D-Day would require concentrating massive forces in southern England. This concentration would be obvious to German reconnaissance. The Germans would see the buildup and know invasion was coming. The question wasn't whether Germany would know about invasion preparations. The question was where the Germans would think the invasion would land. Calais was the obvious target from a military perspective. Shortest channel crossing, only 20 miles. Direct route toward Germany. Established ports. If Allied planners wanted to invade France, Calais made strategic sense. But Calais was also the most heavily defended section of French coast. Hitler expected invasion at Calais, had concentrated defenses accordingly. Atlantic Wall fortifications were strongest there, troop concentrations highest. If Allies invaded at Calais, casualties would be catastrophic. The actual D-Day target, Normandy, was farther from England, had less suitable ports, was logistically more challenging, but it was also less defended. If Allies could land at Normandy and keep Hitler convinced the real invasion was still coming at Calais, German reinforcements would be delayed or misdirected. This required making Hitler believe in an invasion force that didn't exist, making German intelligence see an army positioned to invade Calais when no such army existed. The deception had to be comprehensive, visual, electronic, believable enough to fool professional intelligence analysts. Enter the Ghost Army concept. Create a fake military unit whose sole purpose was deception. Equip them with fake equipment that looked real from the air. Train them to create radio traffic that sounded authentic. Deploy them to create illusions so convincing that enemy intelligence would believe completely. The U.S. Army authorized formation of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops in January 1944. The unit would be small, around 1,100 soldiers, but their impact would be outsized through deception rather than firepower. The recruitment was unusual. The Army needed soldiers with specific skills, not necessarily combat skills, creative skills, the ability to think like artists and designers, to create convincing illusions, to understand perspective, lighting, how things appear from a distance or from above. Recruiters visited art schools, Cooper Union in New York, Pratt Institute, Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art. They looked for students who could draw, paint, sculpt, design, students who understood visual perception. The pitch was vague, important war work, using creative skills, couldn't discuss details. Many art students enlisted, not knowing exactly what they'd be doing. The unit came together at Camp Forest, Tennessee. 1,100 soldiers from diverse backgrounds, professional artists, designers, architects, sound engineers. Some had theatrical experience, some were advertising professionals. What united them was creative problem-solving ability. They were organized into several specialized units, each with specific deception roles. The 603rd Camouflage Engineer Battalion, the Visual Deception Unit. These soldiers would handle inflatable equipment, dummy installations, visual trickery. They'd create the fake tanks, artillery, vehicles that German reconnaissance would photograph. The 3,132nd Signal Service Company, the Radio Deception Unit. They'd broadcast fake radio communications, creating electronic signatures of military units that didn't exist. The Signal Company Special, Sonic Deception. They'd use sound effects to create audio illusions of military activity. And the 406th Combat Engineer Company, Security and Support, plus some genuine combat capability if needed. Training was intensive and unusual. Soldiers learned to set up inflatable tanks, practiced creating dummy command posts, studied how military equipment looked from aerial perspective, learned proper radio protocols so their fake communications would sound authentic, rehearsed coordination between visual, audio, and electronic deception elements. The inflatable equipment was remarkable engineering. The Army had contracted with various companies to produce full-scale inflatable replicas of military equipment. Sherman tanks, half-tracks, artillery pieces, trucks, even aircraft. These weren't crude balloons. They were carefully designed to look authentic from typical reconnaissance altitude and distance. Proper proportions, painted with correct markings. When inflated and positioned properly, they were convincing. A single inflatable Sherman tank weighed about 60 pounds deflated. 4 soldiers could carry one. With a portable air compressor, they could inflate it in about 5 minutes. From 500 feet up, typical reconnaissance altitude, it looked identical to a real 30-ton tank. The Ghost Army eventually had an inventory of hundreds of these inflatables, enough to create the visual impression of multiple divisions' worth of equipment. The sonic equipment was equally impressive. Custom-built sound trucks carrying speakers weighing over 500 pounds each. These weren't normal speakers. They were directional, capable of projecting sounds for miles. The Army had recorded actual military activities. Tank movements, the distinctive sound of tracked vehicles, engines, metal treads on different terrain, construction equipment, soldiers talking, equipment being loaded. These recordings could be played through the sonic trucks at high volume, creating the audio impression of military activity miles away. A few trucks could make it sound like an entire armored division was moving through an area. The radio deception was perhaps most sophisticated. Military units communicate constantly via radio. These communications follow protocols, use proper formats, create a distinctive electronic signature. German signals intelligence listened to Allied radio traffic constantly, tracking units by their communications patterns. The 3,132nd Signal Company studied how real units communicated, learned proper protocols, could impersonate entire command structures. A handful of radio operators could create the electronic signature of an entire division by broadcasting fake traffic that followed correct patterns. The 3 deception elements, visual, sonic, radio, worked together. The visual deception gave German reconnaissance something to photograph. The sonic deception created sounds consistent with the visual evidence. The radio deception provided electronic confirmation. Together, they created layered illusions extremely difficult to penetrate. After training, the Ghost Army deployed to England in spring 1944. Their first major operation was Operation Fortitude, the D-Day deception focusing on Calais. This wasn't solely a Ghost Army operation. British intelligence ran the broader deception plan, but the Ghost Army provided crucial physical components. They helped create the visual impression of Patton's First Army Group in southeast England. Inflatable tanks appeared in fields near Dover. Inflatable landing craft crowded harbors. Dummy supply depots sprang up. From the air, it looked like massive invasion preparation. German reconnaissance photographed it all. Meanwhile, radio operators broadcast traffic consistent with a major army group headquarters. Proper military communications. Reports, orders, logistics discussions, all fake, but all following correct protocols. German signals intelligence intercepted it, tracked it, reported it to Wehrmacht command. The deception worked perfectly. Hitler became convinced Calais was the target. Even after D-Day at Normandy on June 6th, Hitler believed Normandy was a diversion. The real invasion, Patton's invasion, was still coming at Calais. He kept the Panzer divisions there for days, waiting for an attack that never came. By the time Hitler realized he'd been deceived, Allied forces had established their Normandy beachhead. The opportunity to drive them back into the sea had passed. The two Panzer divisions that could have made the difference spent the critical first days of D-Day waiting in the wrong location, deceived by inflatable tanks and radio broadcasts. But Operation Fortitude was just the beginning. The Ghost Army deployed to France after D-Day and conducted 20 more major deception operations across Europe over the next 10 months. The operational pattern was consistent. Real American units would be moving, redeploying, preparing for attack, shifting positions. The Ghost Army would create the illusion that the real units were still in their previous locations. Germans would see dummy equipment, hear sounds, intercept radio traffic indicating American forces were places they weren't. When the real attack came, it would be from an unexpected direction, or with unexpected strength, because German intelligence had been fooled about American positions. One operation in Brittany showed the method perfectly. A real American division was being pulled out of the line for redeployment. The Germans couldn't know the division was leaving. They'd exploit the gap in American lines. The Ghost Army moved in behind the departing division. They set up inflatable tanks and artillery in the positions the real division had occupied. Sonic trucks played recordings of tank movements and activity. Radio operators broadcast traffic imitating the real division's communication patterns. For 2 weeks, the Ghost Army maintained the illusion that the division was still there. Germans never realized the position was held by rubber props and a few hundred men with speakers. Another operation near Luxembourg created the impression of a massive armored buildup, 2 entire divisions worth of tanks, in a sector where the real attack was coming elsewhere. German commanders saw the reconnaissance photos showing hundreds of tanks, heard the sounds of armor massing, intercepted radio traffic of armored divisions. They reinforced that sector heavily. When the actual American attack came from a different direction with real tanks, German forces were poorly positioned because they'd committed to defending against the phantom armor. The Ghost Army became extremely proficient. Operations that initially took days to set up were eventually completed in hours. They developed techniques for making deceptions more convincing. Attention to detail was critical. Real tank positions would have certain characteristics: tread marks from vehicles driving in and out, signs of maintenance, laundry hanging near positions, soldiers washing clothes, footpaths worn between positions, garbage dumps. The Ghost Army created all these details. They'd drive trucks in patterns to create realistic tire tracks, hang laundry on lines, create trash piles, make the dummy positions look lived in and authentic. They even had soldiers wear patches of the units they were impersonating and visit nearby towns. Local civilians would see American soldiers from specific divisions, tell others, and word would spread. Some of that intelligence would reach German agents or collaborators, providing additional confirmation that particular units were in the area. The sonic deception was particularly creative. Sound trucks couldn't just play recordings of tank sounds randomly. The sounds had to make sense. Tanks moving at night toward attack positions, construction sounds during day, engineers preparing defenses, equipment being loaded. The Ghost Army coordinated sounds with times of day and operational context to create believable audio environments. One Ghost Army veteran recalled a night operation where sonic trucks were playing tank movement sounds. They positioned speakers miles behind actual American lines, making it sound like a major armored force was massing in that location. German artillery started shelling the area where the sounds were coming from. The Ghost Army soldiers manning the equipment had to stay in position, playing the recordings, while artillery landed around them. If they'd run, the deception would fail. They stayed, continued broadcasting tank sounds, let the Germans waste ammunition shelling phantom tanks. The radio deception was constant work. Radio operators couldn't just broadcast occasionally. Real military units communicate constantly. The fake traffic had to be maintained continuously, following realistic patterns. Operators would work shifts, maintaining the electronic signature of entire phantom divisions 24 hours a day. They studied captured German intelligence reports when possible to see what the Germans believed. This feedback helped them understand what was working. If German reports showed they believed a fake American division was in a particular location, the Ghost Army knew their deception was successful. If German reports didn't mention the Phantom unit, something needed adjustment. The soldiers of the Ghost Army lived with strange cognitive dissonance. They were combat soldiers, deployed to active combat zones, living in dangerous conditions. They faced artillery fire, air attacks, the normal hazards of warfare. Several Ghost Army soldiers were wounded. Some were killed. But their weapon was deception. They weren't fighting directly. They were creating illusions, putting on performances for an enemy audience that never knew it was being deceived. It was warfare through art and theater. Many Ghost Army soldiers were talented artists. During downtime, they sketched and painted. Some documented their experiences artistically. They created remarkable artwork, showing their unusual war, paintings of inflatable tanks being set up, sketches of sonic trucks, drawings of the European landscape they moved through. Several became famous artists after the war. Bill Blass became one of America's most legendary fashion designers. His military service in the Ghost Army, creating deceptions and illusions, informed his later design aesthetic. Ellsworth Kelly became a renowned abstract artist. His Ghost Army experience with camouflage and visual perception influenced his artistic development. Art Kane became one of the most famous photographers of the jazz era, including the iconic A Great Day in Harlem photograph. The Ghost Army attracted creative personalities. Soldiers wrote about their experiences in letters and diaries, though they couldn't discuss operational details. The tone was often bemused. They were fighting a war with inflatable props and sound effects. It seemed absurd even while they were doing it. But they understood the importance. Every deception that worked potentially saved American lives by misleading German commanders. The Germans never caught on to the Ghost Army specifically. They never realized a single small unit was responsible for multiple deceptions across different locations. From German perspective, they were seeing American units in various places. Sometimes those units turned out not to be where German intelligence thought. Germans attributed this to normal intelligence difficulties, fog of war, incomplete information, American skill at concealment and movement. The comprehensive nature of the deceptions made them convincing. Any single element might have been questioned. Just visual evidence could be questioned. Maybe those tanks are dummies. Just radio evidence could be doubted. Maybe those communications are fake. Just sonic evidence could be explained away. Maybe we're hearing echoes or misidentifying sounds. But when visual, radio, and sonic evidence all confirmed the same conclusion, American division in this location, the compound evidence was convincing. German intelligence trusted the consistency across multiple intelligence sources. The Ghost Army operated through harsh European winter of 1944 to 45. They were present for the Battle of the Bulge, conducting deceptions while one of the war's largest battles raged. They continued operations into Germany in early 1945, as Allied forces pushed deeper into German territory. Their final operations were in the Rhineland, creating diversionary threats to confuse German defenders about where American forces would cross the Rhine River. Even in the war's final months, as German collapse became inevitable, the deceptions still served purpose. Anything that caused German forces to be positioned poorly, that created confusion in German command, that made Allied operations easier and less costly, all worthwhile. The Ghost Army was disbanded shortly after VE Day in May 1945. 1,100 soldiers who'd conducted over 20 major deception operations across 10 months of European combat. They'd moved constantly, often in dangerous forward positions. They'd created illusions that fooled one of the war's most professional military intelligence services repeatedly. Then they were told they couldn't talk about it. The operations were classified. The techniques might be used in future conflicts. Everything about the Ghost Army was secret. The soldiers returned home and couldn't tell anyone, not family, not friends, not other veterans, what they'd done during the war. For many Ghost Army veterans, this was frustrating. They'd contributed significantly to victory, potentially saved thousands of lives, done something remarkably creative and unusual, but they couldn't discuss it. Some Ghost Army veterans attended reunions with other veterans who'd fought in the same campaigns. Those veterans would talk about battles, operations, experiences. The Ghost Army veterans would listen silently, unable to explain that they'd been there too, doing something completely different that no one knew about. The classification lasted 50 years. Not until 1996 were Ghost Army operations officially declassified. Finally, after 5 decades, these veterans, now elderly, many having passed away, could talk about their service. The revelation generated some attention, but nothing proportional to the story's significance. By 1996, World War II was historical. Most media focus on World War II was on major battles, well-known campaigns. A story about creative deception seemed minor compared to Normandy, Bulge, other famous operations. Some Ghost Army veterans gave interviews. A few books were written, but the story remained relatively unknown to the general public. These men had done something extraordinary, conducted warfare through art, creativity, illusion, and almost nobody knew. In 2013, a documentary changed that somewhat. PBS aired The Ghost Army, directed by Rick Beyer. The film told the story comprehensively, interviewed surviving Ghost Army veterans, showed the artwork they'd created, explained the operations. The documentary won multiple awards and brought wider attention to the Ghost Army's story. Still, official recognition was slow. It wasn't until 2022, 77 years after the war ended, that Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors America can bestow. At the ceremony, only a handful of Ghost Army veterans were still alive to receive the recognition. Most had passed away without ever receiving official acknowledgement of their unique contribution. The Ghost Army's story raises interesting questions about military effectiveness and heroism. These soldiers didn't engage in traditional combat. They didn't storm beaches or charge enemy positions. Their weapons were inflatable props and audio recordings. Does that diminish their contribution? Military historians argue the opposite. The Ghost Army's deceptions directly saved thousands of American lives. Every German division that was positioned badly because of Ghost Army deception was a division that didn't kill Americans where the fighting actually occurred. Every German commander who made poor decisions based on false intelligence the Ghost Army created was a commander whose mistakes helped Allied victory. War isn't just direct combat. It's intelligence, deception, logistics, everything that influences battlefield outcomes. The Ghost Army understood this. They fought with creativity and illusion, and they won repeatedly. The practical impact is measurable. Operation Fortitude and the Calais deception alone, keeping 2 Panzer divisions away from Normandy during D-Day, is estimated to have saved 15,000 to 25,000 lives, 30,000 American lives. The subsequent 20 operations the Ghost Army conducted across Europe, each creating diversionary threats or concealing actual American positions, had compound effects that are harder to quantify but certainly significant. There's something particularly American about the Ghost Army approach, taking artists, designers, creative professionals, and turning them into effective military units, solving military problems through innovation and unconventional thinking rather than just traditional force. The Ghost Army exemplifies American willingness to try unorthodox approaches if they might work. It also demonstrates the value of diverse skills in military context. The Army could have formed another infantry division with those 1,100 men. One more division among hundreds. Instead, they created something unique that achieved effects no additional infantry division could have achieved. Recognizing that creative skills had military value was itself an insight. The Germans had deception units too. All major militaries did. But nothing quite like the Ghost Army in scale, sophistication, and effectiveness. German deception was often more passive. Camouflage, concealment, misleading information. The Ghost Army was actively creative, constructing elaborate multi-sensory illusions designed to fool professional intelligence analysis. Post-war military planning incorporated lessons from Ghost Army operations. Deception remained classified for decades, partly because militaries wanted to preserve techniques for potential future use. Modern military doctrine includes deception as standard element of operations, creating false signatures, misleading enemy intelligence, concealing true intentions, all standard now, influenced partly by Ghost Army success. The Ghost Army's story is also a story about secrecy and recognition. These soldiers did something extraordinary and couldn't talk about it for half a century. Many died without recognition, without being able to tell their families what they'd actually done. The few who survived to see declassification and recognition were elderly, in their 80s and 90s. There's something poignant about the 2022 Congressional Gold Medal ceremony. A handful of elderly veterans, representing 1,100 soldiers, finally receiving official recognition for operations conducted in 1944 to 45. Better late than never, but barely. Another few years, and none would have been alive to receive it. The Ghost Army veterans who did speak publicly after declassification were remarkably modest. They didn't claim to have won the war. They didn't exaggerate their importance. They simply described what they did, created deceptions, fooled the Germans, tried to save American lives. Most maintained the same bemused tone they'd had during the war. It had seemed surreal then, fighting with inflatable tanks. It still seemed surreal in retrospect, but it had worked. The artwork many Ghost Army soldiers created during the war is remarkable historical documentation. They painted and sketched their unusual experiences. These aren't propaganda images or sanitized official documentation. They're authentic artistic responses to the strange situation these creative people found themselves in, conducting warfare through illusion and performance. Some of this artwork is preserved at various institutions now. It provides unique perspective on the war. Most World War II art shows combat, destruction, military equipment, soldiers in battle. Ghost Army artwork shows inflatable tanks being erected, sound trucks in forests, the behind-the-scenes reality of deception operations. It's a completely different view of warfare. The Ghost Army story is finally becoming more widely known. The PBS documentary helped. Articles and books have been published. The Congressional Gold Medal brought media attention. Younger generations discovering the story through internet and social media often express amazement that they'd never heard about this before. That reaction is understandable. The Ghost Army story has everything: creativity, deception, innovation, danger, success against the odds. It's inherently fascinating. The fact that it was classified for 50 years meant it couldn't be widely shared earlier. Now that it can be, it deserves to be. The story also provides useful reminder that military history isn't just combat history. The soldiers who won World War II weren't just infantrymen and tank crews and pilots. They were also creative professionals who used art and innovation as weapons. Engineers who solved logistical problems, intelligence specialists who broke codes, scientists who developed new technologies, factory workers who produced equipment, farmers who grew food. Everyone who contributed to the industrial and creative capacity that overwhelmed the Axis powers. The Ghost Army represents one slice of that broader story. 1,100 soldiers with unusual skills doing unusual work that had significant impact. They deserve to be remembered alongside the soldiers who fought more traditionally. Their contribution was different, but no less valuable. The final thought about the Ghost Army concerns the nature of warfare and victory. Wars are fought on multiple levels: physical, psychological, informational. The Ghost Army operated primarily in the psychological and informational dimensions. They didn't destroy German equipment or kill German soldiers directly. They confused German commanders, made them make poor decisions, caused them to position forces ineffectively. In some ways, that's more elegant than direct destruction. Instead of destroying 2 Panzer divisions, convince Hitler to position them uselessly. Same practical effect. Those divisions don't fight effectively, but achieved through creativity rather than force. The Ghost Army proved that sometimes the best way to defeat the enemy is to convince them they're fighting where they're not. This is the legacy of the Ghost Army. Not just the specific operations they conducted, but the demonstration that creative deception is a powerful military tool. That artists can be soldiers. That illusion can save lives as surely as armor and firepower. That sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that convinces the enemy they're fighting a battle that isn't actually happening. 1,100 artists, inflatable tanks, sound recordings, fake radio traffic. And the Germans never knew, never realized they were being systematically deceived by creative professionals armed with rubber props and speakers. Never understood that the armies they saw and heard and tracked electronically sometimes didn't exist. That's the Ghost Army, the most effective deception unit in military history. The soldiers who fought with creativity. And for 50 years, almost nobody knew they existed. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history landed at Normandy beaches. Thousands of soldiers stormed fortified positions. Many died. But thousands more survived because two of Germany's best Panzer divisions sat at Calais, over 100 miles away, waiting for an invasion that never came. Adolf Hitler kept those divisions there because he was convinced General Patton's First Army Group, over 30,000 soldiers with hundreds of tanks, was preparing to invade at Calais. Every intelligence source confirmed it. Aerial reconnaissance photographed the tanks. Signals intelligence tracked the radio communications. The evidence was undeniable. The evidence was also completely fake. Inflatable tanks, speakers playing recordings, radio operators broadcasting scripted traffic, created by 1,100 American soldiers, many recruited from art schools, who formed the Ghost Army. 23 major deception operations across 10 months. Every operation fooled German intelligence. Every deception potentially saved American lives by causing German forces to be positioned poorly or making poor tactical decisions based on false information. Operation Fortitude, the Calais deception, alone is estimated to have saved 15,000 to 30,000 American lives. That's more American lives saved than many combat divisions saved through direct fighting, saved through creativity, through illusion, through artists becoming soldiers and fighting with inflatable props instead of bullets. For 50 years, they couldn't talk about it. Classified. Secret. They returned home and stayed silent. Many died without recognition, without being able to tell their families what they'd actually done during the war. In 1996, the operations were finally declassified. In 2022, 77 years after the war, Congress awarded them the Congressional Gold Medal. Only a handful were still alive to receive it. The Ghost Army proved that warfare isn't just about firepower. It's about intelligence, deception, creativity. Sometimes the most effective way to defeat the enemy is to convince them they're fighting where they're not. Sometimes artists with inflatable tanks save more lives than soldiers with real ones. That's the story the textbooks don't tell. That's the history that was classified for 50 years. That's what War Rewind covers. The untold stories that changed everything. If this story amazed you, if you didn't know the Ghost Army existed or didn't know the details of what they accomplished, you need to subscribe right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. War Rewind uncovers the stories that textbooks skip, the deceptions, the innovations, the creative solutions, the industrial capacity, the soldiers whose contributions were different, but no less vital. Stories that were classified, forgotten, or simply never told widely. Drop a like if the Ghost Army story shocked you. Did you know artists with inflatable tanks saved tens of thousands of lives? Did you realize creative deception was this effective?